My name is Joel, and with me is Alice, Rebecca, and behind me is Josephine. In this program, we'll find out what was the Romantic era. We will try to put ourselves in the way it might have been to live during this time period. We'll find out the poems and the stories you read, who the great writers were, and how the society looked like.
The Romantic movement was an artistic, literary, and intellectual movement that originated in the second half of the 18th century to the early 19th century in Europe. The Romantic era was about the individual's feelings got bigger meaning than the individual's sense. General truth, rules, and norms didn't mean as much anymore. The Romantic era arose as a reaction against the belief in sense during the Enlightenment. The Romantic was against the Enlightenment. They thought that the feeling was the important thing in life. The Romantic era was the strongest in Germany, France, and England, and developed their own kind of romance in every country, even though they had big influence on each other.
Now we are going to meet the one and only, the famous poet-writer William Blake, born in 1757 in England. William has written a lot of legendary poems that are popular in even today's society.
Never seek to tell thy love, love that never told can be. For the gentle wind does move, silently, invisibly. I told my love, I told my love, I told her all my heart. Trembling cold in ghastly fears, she did depart. Soon after she was gone from me, a traveller came by. Silently, invisibly, he took her with a sigh.
So, William, what is the poem about?
The poem is about a man, written he in the poem. He has just lost his wife or girlfriend. In my opinion, I see her as a wife. The narrator wants to mediate that it's not a good idea to hold feelings inside yourself. However, you should always tell the love of your life what's on your mind.
Is there something typical with the poem?
The poem repeats a few words, for example, silently, invisibly. These words do not only describe the sentence, but the whole poem. Love can be very silent and invisible. Love can sometimes often exist between two people only in the air, and you can only feel it. The death is also silent and invisible somehow. It's just there, and we do not dialogue about it. Perhaps that's why I choose a traveler as death. I also believe the poem does cling and rhymes in a suitable way. It rhymes on the last word in every other sentence, and in my opinion, that's enough. As I told you before, I also repeat words, and that is quite typical for the poem. It can affect the reader in a better way of understanding the text.
Would you call the poem romantic? If so, in what way?
It's a very romantic and beautiful poem that does use the word love a lot. You can imagine how much the man loved his woman, and that he got really hurt when he lost her. Maybe death is not so romantic, but it is included in a life between two people. The man sits beside her and tells her his love for her. And I got the impression that he is there for her, and that is so romantic.
My name is Emily Bronte, and I'm a British famous writer. I have so much fantasy, you wouldn't even believe it. That's why I write books.
My name is Jane Austen, and I'm born in Seventon, Hampshire, and I'm here to stir up the pot, if you know what I mean. I think that love often is portrayed very romanticized. I'm more of a passion kind of girl.
My name is Hans Christian Andersen, but here at Paradise I'm more known as HCA. To the children I might be known as the storyteller, but with the ladies I'm more known as the story maker, if you know what I mean. You know what they say, big nose, big...
This is what I see. Everybody stops and
Emily, you have been quite silent during this author's week. How come? Are you not comfortable with the group?
I just think it has been quite dull here. Almost like on the countryside where my aunt lives. I moved there after my mother and my 2 sisters died. But my boredomness has actually been quite resourceful since my imagination was brought to life. And I began writing a lot. My most famous book, Wuthering Heights, might not have even been written if it wasn't for my boredomness. HCA. If you win, will you be spending your money on a nose job?
I was actually bullied through all of my student years, both by teachers and students, for my appearance. This was a good thing though, because it inspired me to write one of my most famous and successful books, The Ugly Duckling. I've always loved to work with my own experience into my literature, so that children would feel less alone when they read it. That's why I mostly write fairy tales for children. Emily, it seems like you and HCA have had a few disputes during the week. Hello, Emily. Would you like some of my smørrebrød?
How dare you! All these invitations for men who just think they can use the female body. You disgust me!
But it's just Danish bread! Could you explain what has been going on between the two of you?
Just so sick and tired of men always telling women what to do and how to do it and bossing their lives around like they're animals or objects. I thought HCA was different, but I now think that he has been oppressing us with his male authority during this whole week. I think this is how the whole society looks like right now. And if you want to know more about how I see the society, you should read my books.
Jane, in the last couples ceremony, you refused to be wed away. What was that about? Don't you want to stand with a man in the next couples ceremony?
I'm actually against being wed away when it has become a necessity for a woman to marry to live a good life in the society, which I clearly ironized, for example, my book, Pride and Prejudice. I'm also really against aristocracy.
Music and visual arts was the big thing except literature. In the Romantic Age we get 2 of the most famous composers ever, Mozart and Beethoven. Almost all of the composers who are described in the music textbooks on the Romantic period are men, even though there have been a large number of female composers through the period. One famous Swedish composer from the era was Maria Fredrika von Stenck. One of our most famous songs was Not True för melodiinstrument.
Our next guest is the famous writer Edgar Allan Poe, born in 1809 and died in 1849. Here to discuss and analyze his short story, Tell-Tale Heart.
The short story is about the murderer's guilty conscience. The victim is an old man with a vulture-like eye that drives the main character to murder him. And by the following day, 2 policemen come knocking on the door, and the killer invites them in. Everything goes well. The police suspects nothing. But suddenly starts the murderer's guilty conscience speak in the sound of a beating heart. The old man's heart. The pounding becomes more and more intensively, and finally, the murderer confesses out of guilt. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been, and I am. But why will you say that I am mad? The beginning throws one into the drama at once, and succeed undoubtedly to capture the reader's attention. One simply has to find out what happened. The theme of the story, the short story, is guilt with elements of temporary insanity. The readers are presented with two people, the murderer and the victim. Their relationship is absent, and the only thing you get to know about the victim is his age, wealth, and his vulture-like eye. I think it was his eyes. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. The main character remains unknown to the reader, and nothing about his accuracy, his ability to plan into detail, and his overflowing guilt are presented. The language is straight and does not circulate around metaphors and comparisons. I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. The chain of events occurs rapidly, even if it occurs during a certain number of days. There is no knowledge for the reader that several days has passed. If still you think me mad, you would think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut up the head, and then the arms and the legs. The short story could be an early forerunner of today's horror films, where the speed of events allows more excitement than learning about the characters and their surroundings. The short story gives a clear message about guilt and how guilt can eat you up from the inside. "Villains!" I shrieked. "Dissemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks here and here. It's the beating of his hideous heart!"
Something I have learned about the Romantic era is that it seems that men had total control over women of that time, and that they were indoctrinated with the idea of getting married to be able to live a worthy life.
The Romantic era has also given us big composers like Mozart and Beethoven.
The Romantic Age was a great time with a lot of expressions and feelings. Lots of poets and writers are famous even today, and that's huge. We can by that go back in time and see how the people lived and wrote and so on.
I believe that we have a lot to thank the Romantic era. It was here that we started to really connect with our feelings and began to use them in our arts.